Hello, welcome back to Taking Tea with Catherine, and welcome back to Jane Austen Black Tea. I was going to drink a different tea today because I don't like to repeat myself, but I was going to choose a Twinings tea because I remember reading that Jane Austen had probably gone to the Twinings tea shop at some point, and then I realized that, guess what, I didn't actually have any Twinings tea at home, which is unusual. Maybe I have to go shopping again, or maybe I should just finish the teas I have. Whatever. But you know what? Repeating oneself is not bad. Sometimes you gotta stay on theme. So we're talking about Jane Austen again today. This time I'm going to talk about my personal ranking of my favorite Jane Austen and my least favorite Jane Austen. We're going to go through from my least to my most favorite Jane Austen of the big six. Her 6 novels that she wrote in her lifetime and published. Well, I think one of them was published posthumously, maybe 1 or 2 of them. Gotta refresh myself on that, doesn't matter. Either way, these are the 6. And we're going to start with my least favorite one. And again, I don't hate any Jane Austen novels. I love all of Jane Austen's novels. But this is just my least favorite. And this is Emma. Yes, this is Emma. I have so many of these that they start to look alike. Emma is a good story. It's a story about a girl named, what's her name? Oh yeah, Emma. And she is wealthy. She really doesn't need to get married. She doesn't really need anything, or she doesn't really want to get married, but she gets involved in matchmaking, setting people up for better or worse, as it were. And then, of course, she has her own love story eventually, because it's Jane Austen, and you're going to have that. But I did love it, and I have to say it was my gateway, Jane Austen. It was the very first one I read, so it can't be bad if it made me want to read the rest of her books. I just don't, when I think about, what would I like to reread of Jane Austen's, this is the one I think about the least. It just seems a bit of a pain, and it doesn't mean that I won't reread it. I still love it. I liked all of the adaptations I've seen, all of them. I think the first one I saw was Gwyneth Paltrow, and there's been other ones that I've seen, and I have not seen a bad version of it yet. And yeah, it's a generally good story, and it was well made, remade, I should say, into a modern day story in Clueless, which I loved. Not in love with, but I absolutely did think it was a well done job. I don't know. It's my least favorite, so that's fine. So let's go back to my rankings, and here comes number 5. Again, don't hate it, but Northanger Abbey. Good story about a Catherine. Again, I love that there's a story about a Catherine, and she's a bit naive, and she goes to Bath, which I like, and I actually don't remember a lot of the story. I remember she's very much involved in novels and Gothic stories, so she kind of lets her mind get ahead of herself. But I don't always remember how much of that is the book and how much is the adaptations. And it's been a while since I've seen an adaptation, and so I have to do that again. And I want to reread it. I'm looking forward to doing it this month. It is a good story. I read it during a time period that wasn't a great time period. 23. Yeah, July of 96. So I don't have the best associations with the time, so maybe that's why it's not one of my favorites, or maybe it's just well suited to be number 5. So there it is. And this is one that a lot of people say it's their least favorite. It's not my least favorite. I actually liked it. I haven't reread it in some time, if ever. Mansfield Park. Really good story. I read it when I was in college, and I was supposed to be focusing on a math class that I probably did not do very well in, which makes sense because I don't do well in math anyway. I'm pretty good at arithmetic, but we're not talking about my math skills. It's a great story. It's just most people don't like the heroine, Fanny Price. They think she's a little too priggish, or she's just whatever. And I have to say, when I was reading it, I actually identified with her, not in her actual circumstances. I wasn't taken out of my home to live with wealthier people, wealthier relatives, and treated badly in a sense, or at least ignored. But I just, there was a part about her not being very fit. Like, she couldn't always keep up with everybody when they're going out on their walks. And I'm a great walker, but I sort of relate to the fact that I can't always keep up with my friends that are a lot more active than I am, most of them. They could rough it in ways that I can't. I'm not dying, but I've always been slightly sickly. So I think that's what was relatable about her, and again, underdog. I've always kind of related to that. It was I felt like I was rooting for her the entire time, and I agreed with most of her choices. Yeah, it was a bit of a slow burn, her how things worked out. But there were so many interesting parts. There was a play within a play. I mean, a play within a novel. This is not Hamlet, but it was a great story. I know they said there were references to the slave trade, etc., which I didn't pick up on when I was reading it. Maybe I was too young. I don't know. I remember seeing the adaptation in the late '90s, and they got more into that. And I don't know how much. I have to reread it again so I can really get it. But I still think, and I've seen both versions of it, although I don't remember much about the Billie Piper version. She was I remember her too much in Doctor Who. I don't really remember her in this story, but it's all around a good story. The ending is resolved very well. Some people get their little comeuppance, which I don't always like that. I kind of don't like people getting punished in books, as it were, but they kind of do, and it's a kind of a slow justice. That's all I can say. I liked it, and I know that there are people who also like it very much. The booktuber, Book Olive, her name is. She has a really good video. Maybe I'll link it about Mansfield Park. A really great defense, and I recommend that you watch that. Okay, now the next two are sort of tied. I would say this one only made it to 3 because the second one I just like a little bit more. I still love this one so much. And you're going to be like, how did this make it to number 3 and not number 1? Because almost everybody ranks this as number 1, but whatever. Da, 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 Pride and Prejudice. I mean, I love Pride and Prejudice. I love, again, all the adaptations. I have to say, it's weird. I didn't see the Colin Firth adaptation when it came out. I didn't have access to cable, which is where I think it was presented on when it came out in America, and somehow I just missed it. It just didn't come into my life. I saw the 2005, was it, Keira Knightley adaptation first, and I thought it was great. I liked it. It was a little, I thought it did go a little fast, like it kind of skimmed bits, but it was still well done. I didn't like the ending as much as some people do, but then I remember talking about it to someone. They were talking about the Colin Firth version. I said, why haven't I watched this? I watched it and I absolutely loved it. It's now one of my very favorite adaptations, one that I watched almost more than the rest. It is a wonderful story. If you haven't read it yet, then I'm not going to go into it, but how could you not have read it? It's about the Bennet sisters and their mother, who is also very much interested in them getting married off. And for very good reason. You think, oh, well, so what? They need to get married, whatever. They're in a kind of a bind. It's a legal situation that they're in where they're, the place where they live, if the father, Mr. Bennet, dies, it doesn't go to his daughters. It would go to the next male heir. It was entailed. That was the expression. So that would go to their cousin, who they didn't meet until, you have to read the story. It's an important part of the story. But so the point is that if he dies, what's going to happen? What are they going to have? Where are they going to live? I mean, they're not going to be destitute maybe, but it's going to be a rough situation. So they really have to marry and marry well. Yeah, I know. Nowadays it's kind of hard to understand that, but it's a big deal. And sometimes I think the mother goes to lengths that are a little much, a little dramatic, but I'm starting to understand why she did that, even though she's a little bit hysterical at times. Anyway, it's a wonderful story. It's got Mr. Darcy. If I were to, if someone, for some reason, were to say, we have to get rid of all of Jane Austen's work, except choose one. You have to rescue one. I would actually pick this one, even if it isn't my favorite, and that's because it is the full package. It does have everything about Jane Austen's storytelling that is good. It has wit. It has not really tragedy, but it has some kind of stakes that become high at a certain point. And it has a dance, a number of dances. It has great lines, great everything, great characters, some exaggerations, but all very interesting. Definitely one of my favorite books of all time. Just not my favorite Jane Austen, and that's fine because it's definitely not my least favorite. And so, what beats this? Well, there's only two more, and this is another one that I absolutely love, and I mean, I just love this one so much. Sense and Sensibility, and it just beat out Pride and Prejudice by a narrow margin, and it's hard to explain why for me, but I don't know. I just love Sense and Sensibility. It's not just because I've always loved the adaptation, which I have seen, many, many times. The one from the 90s, the one with Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet and Alan Rickman and all the rest. There's so many great people in this story. Hugh Laurie. I mean, yes, Hugh Grant is in there too, but Hugh Laurie's in there. And this is before his house days. And I mean, he doesn't even have a big part, but it's just fantastic. I mean, but we're not talking about just the adaptations. I know that's not why I'm talking about this. It's really about the novels, but it's also the story itself, and it's pretty much reflected in all the adaptations. So I think it's because when I first read this book, I was about the same age as Marianne Dashwood is. So the story is that there are three sisters and the mother, and they are, the mother is widowed, and her son, her stepson, I guess. I think they call him son-in-law, but her stepson, so, the father's first marriage, is to inherit everything. It's explained actually a bit better in the book than it is in the films. And now the three daughters, Eleanor, Marian, and Margaret, are suddenly in a position where they don't have much. And also they have to marry, but it's not all about them finding husbands. It's just that they happen to fall in love in different ways. And I always liked that the youngest daughter, Margaret, isn't really that well covered in here, but Eleanor and Marianne are the big deal, and it makes sense actually. When Jane Austen first wrote the story, it was a book of letters back when that was trendy, and it was called Eleanor Marianne. So really, that's the focus. And Marianne was relatable for me at the time because she had such narrow ideals of what she wanted in a prospective mate. And back in the day when I was reading it, I kind of agreed. I kind of wanted a specific list of things, and kids do that, and honestly she sort of has to learn her lesson, and yet I think she still retains a lot of her personality. I hope I'm not giving away spoilers. At the same time, even though now I'm in, much older, I'm probably older than her mother was in this book, which is crazy when I realized how old she was. But even though I now look at Marianne and say, okay, she was a little bit, nuts in what she expected out of life, I kind of understand that was just how she was young. But I also relate more now to the older sister, Eleanor. And in a sense, I think that even though I felt like Marianne as a younger person, I probably did things slightly more like Eleanor. I mean, I don't think I can relate 100% to anybody in any character in any story, but I think that I was a little more sensible than Sensibility. I had more sense. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't the queen of sense, but you know what I mean. I was a little more not willing to become overly emotive, and that's another thing about the story, is that Eleanor has to keep it in, and I think that's one of the reasons I like the film so much, because they show that so much of how she has to sort of suffer through keeping her feelings inside. Sometimes you wonder, why can't she just express herself? And and it's not just because of her culture. It's just the way circumstances are. And in the adaptation with Emma Thompson, when it comes to a part where she finally breaks down in emotion, it's one of my favorite scenes ever in a film. It's hilarious. It's ridiculous, but it's hilarious. And anyone who's seen the film will probably remember that part because it is immortal. It is fantastic. Anyway, so definitely I love Sense and Sensibility. I've quoted it many times. I also quote Pride and Prejudice a lot too, because who doesn't? But I don't know. I just put this slightly over Pride and Prejudice, and maybe another year I will change my mind and Pride and Prejudice will be the second favorite. But as of right now, 2019, this is where it's at. So now we're going to get to the grand finale. This is my favorite one right now, and if you know of her works, you know which one I'm talking about. Persuasion. And I may have to persuade you as to why this is one of my very favorite books of all time and my favorite Jane Austen. And it's hard to explain rather than, it's hard to explain if you haven't read it, because to me, I just love it. But that's not everything. Well, first of all, I know this is stupid because I like big books as well, but I also do like that it's kind of small. So it's like, even though it's actually one of her most mature stories, it's succinct. Like, a lot of stuff happens in this book, but it doesn't take forever to get to the point. Whereas, remember Emma, which I also love, but it kind of went on for a little bit. So I sort of think that's another thing I like about it. Because, like, for instance, I like Dickens, but can you please get to the point, Dickens? And, yes, so how do I explain this? This is a story, and maybe one of the reasons why I consider this my favorite is because I am older now, but I remember loving it even when I was younger. But definitely as an older person now. The main character is one of the oldest in any of her stories, but especially in her big six that are the heroines of the story. And she's, I think, 27 or is it 28? Anyway, late 20s. Anne Elliot. She's in a situation that I don't quite relate to, in that her family is just, I don't know, ridiculous. One of her sisters just treats her as no account. The other one relies on her a little bit too much and is a little hung up on her own issues. But they're not horrible people, but they're not great. They're not great. And her father is just, not going to be Father of the Year at all. I assume her mom was better, but her mom's gone, so that's sad. Anyway, I'm going on and on. So when she was a bit younger, of a more marriageable age, she was interested in a man who didn't have many prospects. So she was persuaded by people who felt they knew better for her to sort of give up on him. So he went off into the Navy, etc., made his fortune. And so this is years later, he's coming back into the picture. She's going to meet him again. And her feelings haven't changed. She's still in the same place she's at. She's still basically, as were most women of that time, sort of stuck in her own situation, unmarried, just kind of living to the whims of the rest of her family and her situation. And now he comes back into her life, but now she's not the only woman around, and so she has to watch as there are other women making plays for him, and him seeming to be maybe interested in them. And I think most women have been in a, maybe not the same situation, but in a similar situation where you feel sort of like, ugh. Again, slightly an underdog situation, and I kind of love the underdog situations. And I just like Anne Elliot. She's just a good person. She has principles, but she's really not a prude. She's just a good person. She does have good friends, and I just like her steadfastness. And there are some beautiful lines in here. There is a letter. Now, there's also a letter in Pride and Prejudice that's really good. That one of the main characters writes, but there's a letter in this book that I can't go into because it is spoilery, but it is one of the most beautiful letters. If someone wrote me this letter, forget it. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so I think even just for that, but even there's bits where Anne speaks of the female perspective in life, and at this time period, it was just, a brilliant thing. I don't know. There's something about Persuasion. I can't go into it without telling you plot points that are spoilery, but I just absolutely love it. And it also goes to Bath. And again, I've read that Jane Austen wasn't actually crazy about Bath. It wasn't her favorite place. She liked living where she lived previously in Hampshire. I don't know. We have a state called New Hampshire, and I don't know. Everybody says it differently. I always feel like I know what I'm talking about, but my pronunciation is not that great. Anyway, but I did go to Bath, again, years ago, and it was kind of a fun city to visit. We only did a day trip. I would love to go back. It was gorgeous, and I think that is part of, it's not like the whole story takes place in Bath, but some of my favorite bits take place in Bath. And there's been 2 adaptations that I've seen, I know there's others, of Persuasion. I like the one with, I think her name is Amanda Root. Again, for the 90s. I tend to like the 90s ones better. I'm sorry, I'm a 90s girl. It is beautiful. She does come off as mature, but there's something about the way she brightens up. Even in the book they get into that, but as time goes on, because In the beginning, she seems a bit wilted, you know. I mean, she shouldn't. She's in her late 20s. That's not so bad, but I guess in those days. But I don't know. There's just something about even the way the actress sort of portrays her that I just love watching that, and I could watch it over and over again. I liked the other version from I think it's 2008 ish, but I didn't love it. Maybe if I saw it again, I would. But they kind of make it. Anne Elliot is sort of keeping a diary at some point, and she kind of writes and then kind of looks at the camera like, oh, woe is me. And it's like a very depressing Jane Austen's version of Jim Halpert from The Office, and it's not funny. Anyway, I don't know. There's just something about Persuasion, and it's really hard for me to put things into words, but just rest assured that for now, I am not strict about this list. I love all of them, but if someone was going to say, what would you recommend? I probably wouldn't recommend Persuasion first, because I have recommended this to people and they read it and said, oh, I really couldn't get into it. And so I was kind of disappointed. So I'd probably just recommend Pride and Prejudice and get it over with, because it is, again, the popular one. But if you were just to go on what I love, this is it. Anyway, I've talked a lot today. I don't usually like to talk for 20 minutes, but I would love to hear your opinions. If you'd like to comment on what your favorites are, if you like to write your own little rankings, feel free to do so in your comments. If you agree with me, I would love to know why. If you disagree, I'd love to know why. I don't want to argue because, as the Cranberries said, 90s girl, there's no need to argue. I miss the Cranberries. Anyway, that is it for now. And if you like this discussion, please subscribe. And if you'd love to talk about Jane Austen, here I am. So that's all. We're taking tea with Catherine, and I hope you have a lovely day. And it is very hot out, so why am I drinking tea? Because why not? Cheers. Bye-bye.